Good afternoon, everyone. This is Randy Gottfried, Director of Classroom Support Services. I want to thank you for joining us on this beautiful December day for our campus budget update meeting, the fifth one we are having this quarter. I will now turn it over to President Roberts.
Thank you so much, Randy. I appreciate just such a great job in helping to facilitate and moderate. I really do appreciate that. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to have so many of you joining us for our final campus budget update for 2020, and it's been quite a year. I want to thank everyone for all the work that you've done in support of each other and our students through a very extraordinary quarter. Again, we couldn't have imagined this a year ago as we were going into 2020, but it's been quite a year filled with so many difficult, painful, unsettling things, as well as some times when we have come together and celebrated the best of who we are. So I want to continue our tradition right now of going through a few slides with you and then opening it up to answering questions. And again, thank you for a great fall quarter. We still have a few more weeks left before all of us go for a welcomed winter break. And then we come back fresh, hopefully for a different 2021 than we had this year. So Randy, if you can move forward to the next slide. Thank you. I've asked Mary Burrows to join me as we do a update both on COVID and some campus updates. And Mary, I know we haven't had a chance to talk, but I did incorporate a slide about how people can use their smartphones as a way to update about COVID. So I think you probably know that better than I, but I just want to let you know that that was a new piece put in because we just got that information and how people can connect with that on their smartphone. So next slide, please, Randy, and I'll let Mary begin.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. First of all, for all of you who have gone in and gotten your flu vaccine, thank you. We know that the flu vaccine is important, especially this year, to decrease hospitalizations caused by the flu infection, as well as complicating cases of COVID-19 with folks who may also get the flu. The notification service that Dr. Roberts was talking about is a unique system that will track, no, it doesn't track. Let me see if I can explain this well. It will exchange random codes with your cell phone and the cell phone of those who are near you. And if that other person becomes COVID positive and puts that into their smartphone, then it will actually notify you of a potential exposure. And according to the Washington State website, which is that wanotify.org, there is no personal information or tracking that is done with that application. So it's an option for folks. Campus COVID trends, we are seeing a pretty significant increase in reports of COVID-like symptoms and exposure to COVID. And we have had a couple of, well, less than a handful of positive COVID on campus situations. The great news is that we still do not have any positive COVID residents in the residence hall. So we are going to continue to be diligent during the holiday season. Dr. Roberts had sent out a message regarding travel out of state during the holiday season, and that we are requiring a 14-day quarantine from coming to campus. Obviously, we can't force anyone to quarantine, but we can ask you to stay off of campus. So when you check in when you check in when you're coming onto campus, you'll notice that there's an additional question about travel. And if you say yes, that you have traveled within the last 14 days out of state, you'll get a message and an email asking you to avoid coming to campus for those 14 days.
So I'll take the next little bit, Mary. So I do want to just, Mary and I have been sharing emails back and forth. There are some changing thoughts about quarantine, and we will update that as well, depending on symptoms and things like that. We want to be conservative, but we also want to be, we don't want to obstruct people coming to campus, particularly some students and some programs that are out of state, and they will be coming at the beginning part of January, and that will be very disruptive to them. So we're working on that, but we also want to be conservative enough, utilizing the most recent updated Department of Health information. So at this point, when we put this out last week, it was 14 days. There's seems to be a little bit of change in that, and we will continue to monitor that. So please be aware and check your DAG and also our COVID page for updates in the next bit, because we do believe it's going to be changing. Just want to let you know that we continue to have support for our employees and our students during this time. And please do reach out if you feel that you need additional support, particularly as we approach the holidays and the winter break. And we are continuing to look at our remote operations for winter. We haven't made a decision on spring yet. We know that there is, of course, a vaccine in our future. We don't know when that will be available to the general population, but we do know that is coming into 2021. We do have a survey that has been sent out or will be sent out to students, asking them about their experience online and what their preference might be in certain new forms of online learning and services going forward into winter and spring. So that will help us to begin to think about spring term differently than just fully remote, with some hands-on experiences for some programs. Next slide, please. And thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. Our next presenter is Vice President Philip King.
Hello, everybody. Randy, if you can move this forward. So I'm going to just offer a couple updates in terms of what's happening in the offices of student learning, but also for students' equity and success. As we've mentioned over a month ago, we've transitioned so that both teams are now reporting to me. So one of the considerations around that as we move through the year is that there may be some conversation around a name change. Nothing is moving fast, and there is no no particular intention. We just want to go through a discovery process if it's necessary, and we'll take the time to do so, but no rush. Second bullet here is that Career Education Options CEO and Learning Center North, LCN, have moved to transition studies. And so it says effective December 1st, but it's a soft transition. That's work that's currently reporting to Acting Dean Malik. She's working closely then with now Associate Dean Jonathan Molinaro, who will then be the person in working with CEO and LCN. And so there's a soft transition, currently working together. Some of the meetings are joint. By the time we get to the 16th, more of those reports will go directly to Jonathan, and by the time we get to January 1st, they'll be solidified. I would also note that, so people are aware, all the things that are happening behind the scenes. All of us are working hard, but the students' equity and success teams in particular, there's a lot of work going on in the advising team related to guided pathways, which is around training, new models, support for the teams, looking at cohort management, onboarding, orientation. They're focusing on all of that with a particular connection to guided pathways. And of course, all of the line staff across the entire area, especially in enrollment services and financial aid, have really been immersed in CTC Link as we're accelerating towards almost a year, slightly over a year out rollout. Next slide. We had 3 athletic teams that returned to practice in November. The return to practices and games are still pending for winter quarter. And again, we kind of went into suspension mode on that, but full decisions regarding whether or not we'll have activity for both practice and play will be guided by outcomes from the Washington Department of Health, and also what NWAC, the athletic conference, the feedback they're getting and giving as well. A comment here really as a relationship, although this is a little more correct, IESC and DEI are still connected to students' equity and success, although I would defer to President Roberts. She's really working closely with those teams, as well as they're finessing the work from last year as a steering committee, and the DEI LT team as a relationship to work that was left over after our previous executive director. So they're still doing that work, but I want to make sure people know it's still going on. We're still trying to fashion that work both so it still has a connection to the Students in Equity and Success Division. That was a goal, so it's not as though it's removed, but then we'll also have crossover relationships to the college in a variety of ways, including the day of learning, practices around hiring, policy. All of those things are still ongoing, and those teams are still working, and they are moving forward with some of their initiatives. It'll also appear in some opportunity gap work. I know some of you have had some questions about that. We did some work around that in the past. Most of that really was predominantly around looking at the data. And now we need to operationalize that work. And that again, may have some connection back to both IESC and DEI, but the operationalizing will be connected to the teams that may then be responsible for the work. And then the last section here, both student learning and students' equity and success work on strategic enrollment initiatives continue. And some of that includes setting target markets for existing and new. And it's just a regular practice with strategic enrollment that you do so that you identify a target, you identify if you want to increase that target and the percentage, and then we create a set of strategies around that and include marketing, both digital and person recruitment, and intentional other kind of hold efforts. We're doing a specific focus on conducting more financial aid outreach. So that was a particular focus this year after the group discovered that as a college in some areas of our service district, which is quite small, we have not necessarily had the same level of penetration as other colleges for the completion of the FAFSA. So the completion of the FAFSA in and of itself is just one of those markers of students getting ready. And we don't have as high a number of students who complete it. So the focus on this bullet is just get more people to actually complete it. And if some of you have done it, you still know it's not as easy as everyone says it is. It's a little complicated to get it done. And then the last is that there are several SES teams that are working on a new student ambassador model. Yes, I know, remotely. That seems interesting, but they're trying. There was some grant dollars that came in to support them. They're going to try and roll some of that work out, and you should see some of it. We can have more reports out on that in the future. Next slide, I believe, is on to the budget process. Cheryl, do you want me to handle that or back to you?
I think I'll take it, and then
Okay.
of course, if there's things you'd like to add, please do so. So we continue to work with our unions, our student leadership, and of course impacted employees to discuss this alternative solutions that's ongoing, and some of those discussions have been concluded. We are continuing to get, and you'll hear this in Vice President Beck's presentation on some budget information and some forecasting. We are getting some positive suggestions, both from the new administration that will take place in end of January, as well as our legislature. Again, nothing concrete, but there seems to be some positive nods to the end of this biennium, which is the 1921, and then moving into the 21-23 biennium. So that's always positive, but again, it's quite a political process with lots of agencies and interest groups needing support during this COVID time. We continue to update and adjust our budget scenarios. You'll see that in Vice President Beck's presentation. We have, in terms of the budget that was approved by the board in October, our projections were around a 10% enrollment decline. We saw it at a 2% lower number than our budget. And then currently, and these are early numbers, we are down about 21%. It seems to be about 20% today. And that's again, 11% lower than our budget. So we're hoping that those will come up and get closer to that 10% budgeted amount that we had in our place as a placeholder there. Our goal, and you'll see some of that, was to always preserve as many employee positions as possible. You'll see the where we landed from the beginning of September to today. And again, we know that even one person losing their position is devastating to them and to their families and their livelihood. And so we take this work very seriously and continue to work on this going forward, knowing that there's a lot of still unknowns regarding, as you know, the COVID, the vaccine, when we can get back together, our international markets, all those things, and of course, our economy getting back on track. And then finally, you'll see some of the resolution to some of our reductions that were anticipated for early December. And we did continue to engage in meaningful conversations with both our collective bargaining unions and always within the confines of our contracts. Next slide, please. Again, I was speaking, but it's going to be actually Vice President Beck and Executive Director Zura who are going to do the next few sets of slides. So next slide, please, and Vice President Beck.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. So we did finish the budget process and have a Board of Trustees approved budget, but there's so many unknowns this year going forward, and we hear a lot of conversation about the allocation and enrollment and COVID costs. And so what I wanted to do is put our current budget in perspective of what's known and what's unknown so that we can have a sense for what some of our risk parameters are coming up. So this first slide is a super summarized version of the budget revenue and expense reductions that we had, and to show which ones are variable and which ones are fixed amounts. And then what we'll do is we'll go into a little bit more detail on the variable, the items that could affect those going forward. So the first reduction that we had was a reduction from the state allocation, and that was $1.1 million, estimated at about 10%. That is a variable amount. We still don't know for sure what it's actually going to be. Even in the back meeting today, they were saying somewhere maybe 5 or 10%. They're still unsure, but at the time when we prepared the budget, the best estimate was 10%. Then the next item is the reduction in enrollment. This is a national long-term trend where enrollment in community colleges has been declining. It started declining when the unemployment rate declined. As jobs started getting easier, there were fewer people coming to college. The thing to notice here is that we had on average about a 10% reduction in enrollment, and that caused a $2 million change in our budget, where a similar size reduction in the state allocation only created a $1 million reduction in our allocation. So as far as magnitude of dollars, enrollment is probably a more important number to keep an eye on, and it is still moving. So at the time we prepared the budget, we estimated that fall quarter was going to be down by 10% compared to last year. As Dr. Roberts said, when fall quarter enrollment finished up, we were actually down 12%, an additional 2% drop. And right now, winter quarter on average is down 20%, with international being down 30%. We're really hopeful that that will resolve and those numbers will start coming back up. But I tell you, I look at them every day because it's kind of scary watching those numbers, but fortunately they are slowly getting better. The next item is the prior year deficit. And again, the reason this is in here is because we built the budget off of last year's actual. This is a fixed amount, not going to change. It's known and it's done. And then the other item that was not in last year's actuals, but is in this year's budget, is the COLAs for faculty and staff. That is also a known, fixed, unchanging amount. So that got us to a $5.2 million deficit. in the operating budget. And then we had to add on to that the preservation cost of this slow, thoughtful staff reduction to make sure that we did have the best numbers possible and that we weren't acting in a hasty way. So that is $1.9 million this year. And then also going forward, we have COVID costs. And those are estimated to be $1.6 million this year, and estimated to be an equivalent amount in the next fiscal year as we slowly come back out of quarantine, as we're able to get our occupancy back up in student housing. The estimate is it will be $1.6 million for fiscal year 21 and $1.6 million for fiscal year 22. So we kind of have these three large hits that we had to reduce the budget in order to compensate for. So our total budget reduction was $7.1 million. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at those three variable amounts so that we can maybe get an idea of what our risk is going forward. Randy, could you go to the next slide, please? So what I've done is categorize them so we can kind of think of them in groups. So the first item is the state allocation. The state has, in positive in green, the state has signaled a more positive fiscal year 21 forecast that could provide us with some budget relief. Remember, 10% was $1 million. So even if they didn't take any reduction at all on our allocation, we would be saving $1.1 million. But to put it in perspective, we have a $7 million reduction. So it would be some relief, but it would not solve the problem. And it wouldn't mean that we would be able to go back and make significant adjustments to the budget. In the next category is enrollment. We are really optimistic that with this economic downturn, that enrollment will at some point go up. It did during the last economic downturn. It went up significantly as unemployment was much higher. But it does take time. In the last economic downturn, there was a 2 to 3 year lag between when the economy first crashed and when we started seeing significant enrollment increases in community college. And I think part of the reason is people have to get through the first shock of the economic crash, and then they have to be able to envision a future again and set some goals. And also for workforce retraining, it takes the gears of government a little while to get up to funding, getting the funding approved, and then through to colleges to get folks retrained. So the good news is we are almost a year into the pandemic already, although it feels like 10 years. We are almost a year into it. So we're getting closer to when it feels like enrollment will go up, but it is still a ways down the road. And during that time, the negative enrollment trend does continue. And it was a significant reduction to our budget. And even more so, the decline in the international enrollment, which has a magnified revenue impact, is the number that is the biggest decrease. So it more than offsets. Even if the state said that they weren't taking away any of our allocation, my concern is that the national enrollment picture would be, the downturn of that would be more than enough to offset any relief from the state allocation. And then the third piece we have is COVID. We are hopeful that there will be additional COVID funds made available. We keep hearing signaling that they're trying to get that through the House and the Senate. How much and when is unknown, but that would provide us with some relief. And we are still incurring COVID costs. There was a cost to close the campus for COVID. There will also be additional costs to restarting the campus. Depending on what the restrictions are when we're allowed to come back on campus, there will be costs for signage and temperature guns with a lot more students on class. So there will be significant startup costs and time to build our occupancy back up in housing also. And then one last consideration in our financial future look is that the legislature is signaling an increase in approving capital projects for construction in the 21-23 biennium. So currently there is, I think, $6 billion worth of capital requests out there throughout all of CTC. And they have, they're looking at possibly $3 billion worth of bonds to fund those capital projects, which means about 50% of the projects that are on the list are going to get funded. There's a lot of stimulus in funding capital projects. It creates jobs, which creates sales tax revenue. Nationally, it creates income tax revenue. There's a lot of velocity of money that happens when money is put into creating directly into creating jobs. So we're hopeful that we will benefit from that. We have a couple of major projects on the list, and maybe they'll increase our capital repairs budget, so everybody also gets a little bit to make repairs. That would be wonderful. It would be great for our campus, but what it doesn't do is give us operating funds. We can't use those funds towards payroll or towards travel or anything else like that, but it would be a benefit to our campus. So that concludes the presentation on looking at variables and items that might be coming down the road that would affect our budget. At this point, we're going to go to Executive Director Zura.
Just found it. And I think there's one more slide, Randy, if you'll forward it. And good afternoon to everyone. I'm just here to go over this last slide, which shows the updated impact across employee groups on the positions identified for reduction in force. You can see in the upper left the proposed September reductions by employee type, and on the right the actual reductions that have occurred as of December. And you can see that there's a difference of 13 filled positions, as we shared at the Board of Trustees meeting last night, based on updated information from the state reflecting the amount of reduction expected from our state allocation and the changes in enrollment, and just really a lot of collaborative work across the unions and with the different employee supervisors and positions themselves. We were able to pull back on several of the positions that were initially identified when we were looking at a much steeper 15% cut and a much scarier future back in September. So what that meant was we were able to pull back 1 administrative position, 7 classified positions, as well as working with 3 additional staff to extend their date so they could qualify for a full retirement. And we also were able to remove 5 faculty positions, full-time faculty, as well as work with the remaining 6 faculty identified for potential reduction in force, in that we were successful in doing a tenure purchase for 5 out of those 6 in lieu of the RIF, leaving just 1 faculty position now going through the reduction in force process. This information, again, is just as of this week. Things are constantly changing. I'm hoping I won't be back up here explaining more RIFs again anytime in the near future, but I am available for questions on any of the data that's shown.
Thank you very much. All of our presenters today, thank you for sharing the information with us. The last slide of the PowerPoint talks about our upcoming meetings in January. So we have our Board of Trustees meeting on January 27th, and our next campus budget update meeting is going to be on Thursday, January 28th at 1:30 p.m. So let me transition out of sharing the PowerPoint with you, and we have a couple of questions that have come in. Please go ahead, continuing to use the Q&A form to submit questions to us. As I have done before, I'm going to copy those over to a Word document and share those out, and we'll go through them over the next hour here. Okay, so we'll start off with our first question. We have been told several times that administrators will get monetary compensation for taking on extra duties. Many departments are losing key members of their staff, and the work that these staff members are responsible for will still be there when they are gone. Since it is not possible to do less with less, can you address how, if the classified staff members will be compensated for taking on these additional duties?
So I'm going to start with the comment, and I know Veronica can speak from the HR perspective on there is a process for looking at additional duties anyone takes on at the college. But we are going to have to prioritize the work that we do going forward. That's going to be the first piece that we start. And then Veronica, you can talk a little bit about how we reclassify things if additional duties are taken on.
Yeah, so for the specific question about classified staff, we are redistributing the work. We are unfortunately having to cut out non-essential tasks because it's not appropriate just to add extra hours to someone who already had a full schedule of work. We need to make adjustments to ensure that, one, they're only given 40 hours worth of work per week, and two, that they're correctly classified. And Cheryl mentioned that as we're redistributing work, it may be that if the majority of work redistributed is significantly different from what the person was previously doing, that could allow them to reclassify to a different title and or salary amount. The other option that sometimes comes up, and it's more periodic or quarterly based, is the use of limited overtime. Sometimes there's just too many things going on. This was even before the situation we find ourselves in now, where there's competing deadlines and stuff you can't just drop because it's all due on the same week. And in that case, we would look at the use of temporary overtime authorizations, much as supervisors can do before this. If there's some time or work needed outside of the regular work schedule to get it all done and the employee is willing to do it, that could be another mechanism to meet just emergent needs. I also want to quickly speak to the first statement about administrators getting monetary compensation for extra duties. There is a process for admin to get extra money, but they have to take on a significant additional assignment. It's not just picking up one piece here or another process there. Out of the 80 administrative positions we currently have, only 5 people who took on significant duties, such as an entire division, for example, are getting any kind of compensation. The remaining 75 plus are not receiving any additional compensation, although I can safely say every single administrator's work has increased this year as we just address new needs for the college.
Thank you. Moving on to our next question. Last night at the Board of Trustees meeting, the board approved an MOU with the faculty to pay them more money for doing their job during the pandemic. That agreement sounds very expensive, and I would like to know, number one, how much is it expected to cost the college? If it will require the elimination of part-time faculty in classified positions to pay faculty this bonus? And number three, are line administrators receiving a similar bonus for all the extra work they have put in during the crisis?
So I'm going to turn to Vice President King because you helped to move forward this MOU with President Hamako, and I think you have a lot of the financial pieces of that.
Sure. A couple of things for us to consider as we think about this. Very good questions. I appreciate whoever asked this. When I say this, please remember, we're aware that we have obligations related to all employment groups, right? But as we're responding in the MOU for faculty, the response is around a change in working conditions. So I know that's true for a lot of us, but it's a change in working conditions. And secondarily, it's a change as a relationship to the way that their contractual obligations are stated and our response in support of those contractual obligations. So that's where that MOU is derived from. It is expected to cost the college slightly under $300,000. That was our estimated cost coming out. Number two, it will not require the elimination of any additional part-time faculty classified position. We had identified that there may have been a potential cost related to this MOU as we were moving through the summer. We'd come up with a potential dollar amount. So I believe this was a set aside as a part of the budget that Don Beck has been presenting to you, that there's an amount that we had reserved in anticipation of paying this out. And then the last is that, no, there are no line administrators receiving a similar bonus. This was an MOU as a relationship to faculty. And it impacts both part-time and full-time faculty, only for those two employee groups, that employee group.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President King. Moving on to our next question. With the upcoming vaccination discussion surrounding mandatory vaccination for employment, what is Shoreline's position on this? Will you be requiring vaccinations to maintain employment?
So you all must be in our conversations with the presidents across our system. We would get direction from the Department of Health and from the governor's office as well on this. So right now we don't have any information about the mandatoriness of vaccinations, even though we do have vaccinations mandatory for several of our programs on our campus. So that's not uncommon, but we haven't gotten any kind of directive yet or any kind of really deep discussions about that as a requirement for public employees to be vaccinated as a requirement for employment.
Thank you. The next submission is a comment. Yesterday's open comments at the Board of Trustees left me feeling demoralized and ashamed on behalf of the college. We are better than this. We do not need to resort to name calling and what feels like scapegoating. From what I hear, most of the presidents at Shoreline end up being treated like this. Does this say something about us? Moving on to the next question. And this one is a clarification. I believe it's around the athletic conference that we're in. It's no longer the NWAACC. It is now the NWAC. So just a clarification on that had come in.
I will note that and adjust all of my upcoming messages. Thank you for that.
And moving on to the next question. How do you plan to support those of us who are still here and doing double and triple jobs now?
So this is connected to one of the first questions. The first thing we need to do is really prioritize, as I mentioned, the work that needs to be done, particularly with some of the larger foundational pieces and CTC link that's coming down. And then the second piece is if in fact there are additional duties or significantly different, we do have mechanisms within our HR practice to support people in that, including also overtime where it's needed for short durations of time. So we do have ways of addressing this and we will.
Thank you. Our next question asks, it sounds as though the underlying message is that if enrollment continues to decline or does not come up enough for next quarter, jobs will need to be cut for the next quarter. Can you speak to what that might look like specifically?
Sure, I'm going to speak a little bit about this, but Vice President Beck, you may want to also join on. One of the things that you may note is around the state's allocation. We moved from 15 to 10%. It may be such that the state does not take any of that. And so those dollars can be used to cover the decrease in enrollment and projected revenue. So that's the first place that we would go. We also are always looking at our spending rate. It's quite different than it has been because we're mostly remote. We do have spending that's directly tied to COVID that is higher than anticipated a bit, but those are the areas that we would look at first. We did talk about some things around a temporary furlough to get us through the end of the year, but at this point we feel as though the budget that has been developed would give us the bandwidth to cover any vagrancies that happen as a result of continued enrollment decline. But if it's steep, I mean, that's going to be a totally different story. But right now, we do feel that we have built a budget that can handle the upcoming enrollment shifts. But Dawn, you may want to also chime in.
Yep, and that's exactly right. What we wanted to do was to be as easy on the campus and the morale of the campus as possible during an incredibly hard time. And we don't want to have a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. We built a budget where we did have to take significant reductions that were enough to meet the foreseeable challenges. But we didn't kid ourselves and say, well, we think it's going to get better, or maybe it's going to be this. We really looked at it through a sense of reality, knowing that we didn't want to have to come back and take more cuts later. So there are currently no plans for additional cuts at this time. If we have to have a fallback plan at this time, as Dr. Roberts said, we could at that point consider furloughs. But again, the future is unknown. The slides I presented did wind up being a little bit more negative than I intended, but that is because there is a lot of unknowns out there that could have significant financial impact. But at this point, as Dr. Roberts said, we built a budget that is enough to cover the known decreases, and we have no current plans for any further reductions.
Thank you. Well, I have you here, VP Beck. There was a question that came in saying that you mentioned a meeting called BAC or BAC. Can you provide an explanation of what this meeting is?
Yes, and thank you for the comment. I should not use acronyms. BAC is the Community and Technical College business VPs of business have a weekly meeting where we share information. And so that is what BAC is.
All right, thank you for that explanation. And next question asked, Vice President Beck tells us that we need to cut $7 billion in 2019-2020. How much has the college cut to date? What is the dollar total of the cuts that are yet to come?
So $7 million was the entire cut for the current year's budget, and that has been done. There is some additional cost this year, $2 million of additional cost as we slowly phase in these reductions. So, but there are no additional anticipated cuts at this time.
Thank you. The next question asks, is there going to be a change in our Board of Trustees members?
Not at this time. We are looking at bringing in a 5th board member. As you know, it is a 5-member board, and we've had 4 members for a long time. So one of the goals of the board is to bring in a 5th member.
Thank you. The next question, how many programs ID'd for elimination have been saved? How many eliminated? How many are eliminated?
So I'm going to ask Vice President King if you have that, or Veronica, Executive Director Zura.
So I'm pretty sure the question here is as programs. We're talking about instructional programs. That's my assumption. And again, remember the way that we define programs. There's from a program context and how we make statements about elimination of program. It's really around a formalized program like business tech or education. Those are 2 that are specific programs. If there are positions in areas that are being RIFed or were up for RIF that were not part of programs. So those are different things sometimes. But programs, those are the 2 that we've commented on. And business tech actually was highlighted more than 1 year ago, actually, for the potential to sunset. Our regional accreditor through NWCCU was notified as part of our process that we were considering sunsetting that program. We've been in the teach out for that program for over a year now. So as we move forward, we're in the process for that one. Education is the other one that we've ID'd for potential elimination. And then to the extent that things have been saved per se, again, I'm trying to be responsive to the question. I wouldn't say anything that we put up as an initial suggestion for program elimination has been saved. And so I think I've answered this. How many have been eliminated? There are 2 currently that we are discussing for this year that are now slated for elimination as we finish this year. Business tech is in a closeout, will be closed out. Education is in that same process.
Thank you, VP King. Next question. Is it true faculty refuse to give up their free parking to help balance the budget?
That's an interesting question. It is a bargained piece, and neither classified nor faculty pay for parking at this time. It wasn't part of negotiating the contract. It is an interesting question, as the 2 groups that actually pay for parking are students and admin. Pardon me. I don't think there's any refusal. It's part of their collective bargaining agreement, my understanding.
Cheryl, I was just going to offer too, as some people are aware, part of a process post-RIF is that you and I and Veronica engaged with the Federation around conversations about alternates to the RIFs. And so suggestions came up. But I'm just being clear, this was not brought up at any point during any of those conversations. So there's been no refusal. It wasn't even a topic of conversation in those meetings, if people are asking around the particular meeting.
Thank you.
Our next question, there's several questions throughout here, so I'll take it as slow as I can. Haven't all deans been upgraded to executive title and higher pay? Haven't they at the same time been relieved of working by creating several associate dean positions to serve in that work? How many associate deans are there now? What is the pay amount for executive dean? What is the pay amount for associate dean? Are dean costs lower or higher total overall than they were 12 months ago?
Philip, do you want me to start out on this one?
If you want to.
Okay. So I saw this in the questions and I went through and pulled some information. I would like to go back and double check it, but I did pull the information related to all dean, executive dean, and associate deans for last year and this year. The first question, haven't all deans been upgraded to executive deans? No, we still have a dean of student services, a dean of access and advising, and a dean of nursing and health occupations. We did have 2 dean positions that were upgraded or increased in terms of the scope of responsibility, and are now titled at executive dean levels and have a salary increase matched to the other executive dean that was already on campus for STEM. We have currently 4 associate deans. One is in the library, one is in STEM, one is in social sciences, and then we have an assistant associate dean in transitional studies. And again, those positions totaling up this year compared to what we spent on the same positions last year, noting that some positions were moved around. This question came up earlier about where did we cut the money to increase pay for deans? No money was cut. We had funded vacant positions such as the executive director for automotive that were converted into an associate dean position to meet a need for each of the divisions around support services. And the difference is something like $8,100. But again, I would like to go back and double check that, given that I just pulled the numbers off of control list from this year to last.
The only thing I could say, I can comment about workload. In the two cases where we created changed positions from dean to executive dean, it was really around workload. So one, it was a capacity to be able to get the work done, and two, the associate deans behind enable them to actually now get the work done, and at the same time backfilled in areas where we were not able to get other things done. So we were not even accomplishing other activities we should have been doing. So they fill in a gap and they add to an area of a gap that we hadn't filled previously. So, and then Veronica, I don't know if, again, maybe to the comments about the amount of pay, you might want to respond to that later when you have actual pay amounts that are appropriate. I don't know.
Sure. So I can it's about 90,000 for an associate dean. It's about 109,000 for a dean, and it's about 120,000 for an executive dean. And that's assuming they meet full scope of responsibilities and have the prerequisite educational background and experience.
Can I just also chime in? I think the underlying, question is, this was part of the original reorg that you talked about, and it was pretty much budget neutral. Philip, can you discuss that? I mean, I think that's underlining, how did we get to this? It's last winter.
I mean, thank you, President Roberts. That tags off of, I think, something specific that Veronica commented on when she was commenting on the executive director of automotive as one of the examples, right? There have been positions in the budget that have been sitting. In previous years, they've been either funded and continuously funded, or the dollars have been utilized for other kinds of things. And so this effort, as it was undertaken last year when we went through a budget shift, was to create these positions behind to support for the work, and utilizing dollars that were existing in a way that both either one, utilized dollars straight across, or in some cases created some savings. I don't remember if I have the total bottom line on the savings, but we were neutral on the savings. That was the goal.
Thank you. The next question. If overtime is needed for staff to backfill duties, how will that be accounted for in the budget? Assumes no funds budgeted for overtime.
It kind of depends on what the overtime is for, because there could be a couple of different options. For example, if it's related to COVID, the COVID response, right? We do have, Don mentioned, I think, a $1.6 million need right now. And some of that is around staffing needs for those still on campus or supporting like temperature check-ins or whatnot each day. It could be that there's also some savings that are variable. For example, a department might have multiple staff who have requested to voluntarily reduce their hours because of childcare or other needs, and their full position remains budgeted, but there could be savings in those voluntary reductions across the period of time that could be applied to others for overtime or used to backfill the work. So it's going to be dependent on each area, but if there is an area who's struggling to find a way to identify the services needed and how to make it work with the existing staff, please just reach out to me. I'm happy to try and work through that with you.
I would also say, in terms of CTC link, there are funds that have been put into that budget for overtime for that specific purpose, because we know that will be required.
Thank you. Next question. My favorite shoreline teacher has been working at least 20 hours per week during most of March to November 2020 and will receive nothing from that MOU. What about that?
I don't really know quite how to respond to that question because I don't know more of the specifics. And, oh, maybe I know you know the ins and outs of the MOU better than I.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, I think we probably need more particulars. I'd be happy if someone, if someone wants to write to me directly, or maybe maybe they want anonymity. If we have information about who it is, we can certainly track back. If you read through the MOU, in some cases, there are some particulars where the caveats to who might not get money have to do with things like if a person has more than one of the same class. So let's just say they taught 3 sections of English 102 in spring quarter, they're only paid that stipend for one of those sections. So, but they're still paid for the one. So I don't know. I mean, and we, you know, as it regards individuals, we'd have to look at that individual line item to identify why that may be occurring. We need more information.
I will just say that it's not our intention not to follow that MOU. It was, it took a long time to get to it and to agree to it. And it was ratified by the faculty and adopted yesterday and approved by the board. And so our goal is to give the money out according to that MOU as it has been agreed to.
And President Roberts, I was also just reminded by Dr. Maring, and we had forgotten, so this could also be the case. For persons who are already all teaching online, because we do have programs that are actually fully online, those were not compensated because it's their normal operation. That's how they work. Our health informatics degree is a good example. It's a very successful, well-run program that has been operating fully online for quite some time. So it could be that it may be that kind of program. I just don't know. We'd need more information.
The next submission is a comment. At this time, it is allowed for anyone with measles or mumps or flu or other contagious diseases to be unvaccinated and on campus. I can't imagine COVID being banned when MMR and DPT and flu are not banned.
Just a quick comment on that. Yeah, I can't imagine it being banned either, but we would see if any directive came from the state that would apply to all agencies, not just us. But we do not allow people on campus who have an active case of measles or mumps or anything else that's an infectious disease, and that's under our communicable disease policy. And it's just a period of making sure that we're keeping people who are on campus and potentially unvaccinated safe, given that we're a public institution, if someone has a known infectious disease.
Thank you. I don't understand why the administration keeps using the phrase, do less with less. This is unrealistic. We are doing more with less. You say to prioritize, meaning to eliminate some things. But we cannot do this if we are to support our students, staff, and faculty, each other. How do you propose we do our jobs at 100%, as is our duty as educators, while we lose support staff and have double the work?
Well, I would start with, you know, my original statement is that we will have to prioritize the work that we do and how we do our work, and that's going to require all of us to think about that in new and innovative ways. You know, we aren't asking people to do more, but we are asking people. We will redistribute work, and we will have to eliminate some work that just we cannot no longer continue to do in the same way we've done it in the past. Luckily, CTC Link is going to help us do some of that. It's going to take us until 2022 to realize those savings in terms of time utilizing technology. But it is one of the ways that we have to think about it and set expectations of what we can do with the number of people who are working and will continue to work. So it will be a need to reset expectations of what we can do with the number of employees that we have and the type of work that can be done and the level of service we can provide to our students and within a reasonable timeline. So we'll need to recalibrate ourselves, definitely.
Thank you. What if prior to those current cuts, your department was already understaffed and some of us are already maxed out and trimmed down? What can we do within reason? Then what do we do? Will we be able to get overtime? I understand you are saying we need to trim back to vital tasks, but some of us are already operating that way. So what we hear is we need to just deal with the transition and expect no additional compensation.
So I think the first piece is for those areas that feel that way, they can work with their manager, their administrator to work and do some analysis of where they are. We will use overtime where it is appropriate. And again, this is a recalibration of our whole campus. We can't make these kinds of reductions without that, and setting expectations for our timelines and delivery of things, and reprioritizing. I mean, it's hard words to hear. I do know people are working hard, and we are already a lean organization, and it's going to require us to be innovative, to be creative, but also to be realistic. And I think that's what you're really hearing. We want us to be realistic about what we can get done within time, and also knowing that we have to also begin looking at foundational pieces that are not in place, that need to be in place, that our students are requiring in order for them to be successful. So we've got many things we've got to do. And the reality is we're going to have to start doing some of those quite differently than how we have done routinely. And that's going to be upsetting, and it's going to require some change. And we want to come alongside all of us, including the work that we do from the Office of the President all the way through every part of the organization. So I know it's not easy, but we do want to support you. Luckily, we have a change management person on campus to help us and that's in Joe Chapa. He's focused on CTC Link, but a lot of this is going to require some change management and rethinking about how we do our work. I see Veronica, you're on. I know you've got some ideas as well, comments.
Cheryl, I would just offer, interestingly too, again, I know that people perhaps are writing some of the comments in an anonymous manner, but I know that in the time that I've been working now with SES, although it could be anywhere in the college, I don't know where the question comes from. I've had this conversation quite a bit now with both Deans Malik and Dean Levy, as I'm trying to understand better the entire SES team. And so we even talked with Dean Levy today about this, about one of the units. So operationalize what you're saying. I think if there are units that are personally concerned about this, then I would ask that they, write to me or their dean, and let's identify how we can work through that. I think I'm hearing through the questions that people are struggling to figure out, what does less with less mean? Or even in some cases, we've already been doing more and are understaffed. How do we go about transitioning that? What does that look like? How do we navigate that? And so we need to know that. And I'm sorry if maybe you already told somebody and they didn't hear, and then hopefully we can, sit down together on Zoom, unfortunately, and figure out how to help you with that. That would be the next step for some of the units.
I would just, sort of conclude by saying that we want to understand where the pinch points are, and to help to set those priorities and to strategize with folks about it. We don't want to be insensitive to it, because we know that when people leave, there's still work that has to be done. And we really are going to have to, set different expectations and deliverables based on who's here and doing the work. And again, as Philip says, we are open to hearing where those things are, and sharing them with your manager and or administrator and or all the way through to me or to a executive team member.
Thank you. Next question. This is not related to the budget, so feel free to answer in written format, but we'll just read this into the meeting record as well. Is CTC Link accessible yet? Are we okay with opening ourselves up to possible litigation by taking on inaccessible platform?
So I don't know, Gavin, you might know more than I. That is one of the things that is a topic of conversation at the president's level, about the accessibility, what parts are accessible and what parts are not. But Gavin, you may have more technical knowledge about it.
I can tell you that State Board is continuing to work with PeopleSoft on improving the accessibility, and they know that they have to get there. So it's a question of how does that happen? How quickly does that happen? But you can imagine that every college is insisting on this, and I expect them to continue to make progress on it.
Thank you. What is the expectation for administrative staff related to hours worked per week? If administrators are working upwards of 50, 60 plus hours per week, is that expected and acceptable? If not, how and when will that be addressed? Burning out employees is not a good long-term strategic plan for the college.
I appreciate all the questions about this. That is absolutely correct. We don't want any of our employee groups to be burned out. And that is a question to be talking with your immediate supervisor about and to look at. We do have to pace ourselves. This is a very, as I said, I started off a very unusual time. So it's just the stress of the unsettledness of what we're going through. We went through a lot of political unsettledness. We went through racial unsettledness, pandemic unsettledness, moving to remote work environment mostly. It's just been a year that has been nothing like we could have ever imagined, and it weighs over time, and we're going into a year into this and not knowing when exactly we'll be coming back and what that will look like. And so we do need to reprioritize in many ways the work that is ahead of us, looking at what's the most important things to be doing, because in the months ahead, we will be thinking about and preparing to re-enter and to return to the campus. And that in itself is going to be a heavy lift. So again, we want to be reasonable about it. And we've been talking about that both at our communicable disease team. We're going to start on that this coming quarter to begin that re-entry, as well as an executive team, along with all the things that are happening with the budget and loss of course, colleagues in roles that were important. So again, a long answer to yes, we want to make sure that everyone is looking at their workload. And if you've got concerns, please talk with your supervisor or your team member.
Next question. I saw on Shoreline's Facebook page that we are going to offer a criminal justice advocacy certificate. Are there any other certificates or programs in the works to meet our community's needs and hopefully offset some of our budget woes? It would be great for Shoreline employees to learn more about such things via our campus-wide meetings as opposed to through social media.
I can start off by saying that this particular First in the Nation certificate was on DAG. It was also highlighted in the media. Martha, you might be able to talk a little bit more about all the places it was shared, both on and off campus. It is a real signature program that got a lot of media press, both on and off our campus.
The other thing I would say is it's on our college news blog. And so that is a great place for employees to regularly check for new announcements that we're making publicly to the rest of the world. If you go to news.shoreline.edu, we've got a whole blog there that's got various topics in there, but that is a great place to just regularly check, where we often will post something like this once it's ready for a public announcement.
And then Dr. Roberts, if you don't mind, I would comment on a couple things. It's a really good question. I appreciate the question again here. In my work at other colleges, when we think about other certificates and programs, often those things emerge from academic planning. And so you forecast forward. I know Dr. Roberts knows this, she's done this a lot. but through educational planning, and you look out into your local community, do a lot of research, and you forecast out what potential exists for us to expand existing programs, to shift a program, or to start new programs. And you often pull in your academic team, and that's often the faculty in academic planning conversations. So that's how we normally do that. We are beginning that process again. Dr. Maring and Dr. Hamilton will be leading that on the academic side this year, just at least in terms of this year's activities, but more broadly to look forward and link to our larger strategic plan for the future. In specific, I'd say, and we can send out a list, I've asked the deans to look at certain things that they've already identified. This is one program. This was over a year ago. Before I got here, it was in the works. But other things, as we mentioned last week, our business intelligence degree that we mentioned in our last meeting is another one of those degree programs that we're looking at. That's actually, we're very hopeful. But I know that I responded to Mary Burrows about the fact that we potentially want to talk about a bachelor's degree in nursing. We may just have a partnership with another college. We may have our own. We also talked with Mary about a key area that may include home health, but also behavioral health as a program. So the deans are right now looking at a lot of these areas for growth. And if you're interested, you may want to talk to them. Some have more than others. And maybe as a different conversation or another time, we can come up with a comprehensive list.
Thank you. The next question. Given the precarious positions associated faculty occupy, can they be considered the red shirts of the Starship Shoreline, ready to be sacrificed to give full-time faculty their moonlights and preserve their positions?
This is a really I'll just start with, we have a collective bargaining agreement that talks about how full-time faculty need a full load, and we have to start there first. If we are seeing a decrease in enrollment, then we have certain categories that do have, I don't know what the right word is, Philip, you might want to, sort of step into.
Of course, yeah.
I'm thinking about priority associates and prorata, and so we do have certain classifications that we have to make sure that they have a full load or they have their load that has been anticipated. So it does, we entered into those bargaining agreements, we hold them, and at the same time, all of our faculty are really important and vital. Our students see them all as faculty. They don't ask them, are they part-time or full-time or tenured or any of those things. If you're in the classroom, you are their professor, you are their instructor, and are very valuable to them. So I just want to say that when we are having lower enrollments, we do have to look at reducing our faculty ranks, and it starts with part-time faculty because of how we're structured through our bargaining agreements. Philip, you want to?
I guess the only other thing I'd say is I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure who wrote the question. I'm happy to actually have a conversation. I'm not sure if I'm picking up all the nuance of this question. There's more in here than maybe I'm understanding, but I at least say about moonlights, and Cheryl, it probably just, it just adds to what you've already said. Is a reminder that there are contractual obligations that we have based on the contract that we negotiated with the Federation that has component pieces that we're obligated to provide related to both full-time and part-time faculty. Part of the full-time faculty right to classes, you might say, is that they have the right to be assigned a moonlight right after all the full-time assignments are made. And there's an order of operations, it's stated in the contract, and we follow our contractual obligation. I'm not really sure if that's the question. So again, if the person wants to chat about it, I'm happy to do that. Or
All right, thank you. The next question asks, what is happening with counseling services?
Vice President, I know, King, you've been working with that area.
Yep, we have. I've been working closely with Dean Levy on this over the last 2 weeks. It's only been 2 or 3 weeks, I think, since it's kind of been connected to me, and we're working closely on it right now. I can say a couple of things. One, I think it's been mentioned several times. We're trying to look at some portion of the service that could be referral out. We'll come up with an explanation of what that means to everybody and how that would work both for students in the college. Two, looking at the fact that all of your jobs, every time I say certain things, I want to couch them and say them appropriately. All people's jobs are complicated and busy. I want to make sure people understand that. But the counselor jobs that we have at this college are some of the most complicated that I've seen in my work history because they have so many different responsibilities. So what we're trying to do is narrow the responsibilities to things that we are the highest need. And those highest need items really are on the personal and on the verge of mental health counseling. They do a variety of other things, including teach, some career planning, the workshops for the campus. So we're trying to narrow down the highest need based on the resources that we have, the staff that are available. And that also includes then to staff that support them. So we're also trying to identify the right staff that support them. And that's currently what we're looking at. We've got some feedback from other colleges that have done some of the contracting out, how it works, what the numbers are, what the process is, if there's a cost, things like that. We're exploring that. And we will be bringing that back to the counseling team or person that's there for additional feedback as we roll into the new year. And the dean currently is working with the unit to ensure there is support behind as one of those faculty members may most likely be leaving. But that's, as we're finishing the process, that's not quite finished. But if that happens, to have support behind that person to ensure that we can continue to support highest counseling needs as we continue through December into January and through the year. And we will, as we develop more of that model, we will work closely with the counseling team. We will then communicate both to SES and a larger college about what that looks like, how to access it, clear up the website, send out communications, all of that will be forthcoming.
Thank you. The next one, submission is a comment, says 20 hours per week extra because of remote working. And with the asterisks, I think that's maybe a correction or an addition to one of the comments that came in earlier.
I do want to say, I know everyone's working really hard during this time. We're definitely not, doesn't go unnoticed. As I said, this is a different type of work than we had anticipated doing, or longer than we had anticipated doing. And we've got a ways to go before we're back to being back on campus. And that's going to be different. We don't even know what the protocols are going to be in terms of physical distancing, cleaning, hygiene, all those sort of things. It's going to be a different world as we move into that, and we'll have to cope and change with that. So again, I hope you're hearing that. We know this has been an incredible burden on all of us, and that's why we really do have to, and as I've spoken to everyone in the executive team, we have to really focus, the laser focus on what's the critical things we have to do, and set expectations both for ourselves, our students, our community, and each other about what can be done this year as we navigate toward a return to campus, and whatever that's going to mean and what that impact's going to be for us.
Next question, did you keep the counselors and Running Start advisor?
So Philip, do you want to talk a little bit about how that all worked out, as well as the potential plans going forward?
I believe at the current time, we, through the last 2 iterations of budget change as conveyed by Executive Director Zura, when you see the changes in September and then after about position changes between September and October period, there were no adjustments made to pull back either a running start advisor or a counselor advisor in that time, nor have there been any changes since that time. So the running start advisor that was being eliminated as a position is still on the list to be eliminated. And then the same for the single counselor is still on the list. And that's still being managed in that manner. And then I respond back to your other question then about how it's being managed. I responded just to previous question about counseling and what we're doing about that. And there may be part-time support. We'll figure that out. Again, explanation forthcoming. Running start, I do know that we can give more detail, but I know that Dean Malik in her role has been working closely with them because this was announced actually beginning July 1, the running start position would be changing. And so they have been working on a plan. It's been slow and it's been a little complicated, whereby the advising for running start will be incorporated broadly across all advisors. So there won't be a singular running start advisor. At the current time, that's the plan related to the positions and to the work.
Thank you. How will the college be teaching out the business tech and education programs?
Philip, I know that you've been working on this in
Sure.
the last week.
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't, colleges don't go through this a lot, so that it's not very familiar for people what this actually means. A teach out is an opportunity for us to ensure through our commitment to students that they have the opportunity to finish. So if we bring them into a program, our commitment to those students is to identify a way to personally work with each student and create an individual teach out plan that allows the student to finish out the program that they entered. That's done typically in done in 3 ways, and sometimes there's mixing between the 3 ways. The first one is that existing faculty in the program remain connected to the program for a longer period of time in order to ensure that you can finish the students out in their program of study. An example would be if it were eliminated, let's say in December, and then we knew we still had students in the program, yet they had a 1.5 years to finish, then we would identify, if we decided to go with option 1, that they would be taught in their program by faculty members who were existing at Shoreline. So maintain an individual plan, teach at Shoreline. That's 1. 2, you could pick up courses at other colleges. So whereby a student might do part of the plan here, part of the plan at the other college. And it could be because, for example, Edmonds. The Edmonds doesn't necessarily have it, but I use that as an example, has ECE components. And so we would say, or business tech, you can take it all together there because it's offered there, or because the student creates the plan and says both are offered. Then they package together again an individual plan that comprises both of those versions. Online is another piece, and that's actually very significant to the education program because there is a very robust online education program in the state that students can access. So that's added to both 1 and 2 if needed. And then a third option sometimes that's utilized is that you identify a place that the students could potentially finish their program, but at a whole new college. So you work with either a limited entry or another program. It could be in the regional area. It could be in a different area of the country. And you then assist the student in ensuring that they can navigate and finish the program at that other location, whatever that location may be. All of those options are being explored. More specifically right now, those individual plans were built for all of the business tech students. It was a process that was undertaken a year ago. I think I mentioned this before, but previous acting associate dean, I know her name, but it is Friday and I'm missing it right now, Kyle Winslow, worked on all of these plans with Dr. Mooring and then worked with each of the individual students along with Gail Dalton and other business faculty. And that each plan was developed, each student is following the plan, and quarterly they review the plan to ensure students are on track and they have a goal and a target to finish the plan. it can't continue forever. We would do the same thing for students in the education programs.
Thank you. The next question. Can you say why ECE is being cut? Is that 100% happening now?
I know that we're going through the RIF process. So Philip, maybe you can talk about that process for Veronica.
I mean, that's, again, it's to the last comment. The why is a matter of some of the factors that we looked at that contribute to either one, kind of overall, efficacy of program. It really has to do with cost ratio that I would take us all back to the year ago department assessments we looked at. That was one. Two, we do look at FTE being generated as a relationship to the total FTE being produced, which is the number of students in the classes and the number of courses that we're teaching related to the number of people we have working. And then three, would also say that we look at other companion programs or similar programs in our regional area. So when we, and as academic programs, much like the other question someone asked about new certificates of programs, we forecast forward, or we should be, to say, what should we be offering in the future, course-wise, program-wise, where can we expand? Sometimes we ask where are programs that we may not necessarily need to offer anymore, either because they're cost prohibitive or because other program areas pick them up. EC is an area that has been picked up both in the online consortium, as I mentioned, and at other areas in the regional area. So there are opportunities for students elsewhere. And last thing I'd say there is, and I know Dr. Roberts said this, this was a very complicated and difficult process. I might state it in a simple way. I'm trying to be responsive and thoughtful in my response. I don't want to make it sound as though it was a quick decision. None of these decisions were easy. None of them are enviable. We didn't want to cut any programs. We're not interested in doing that. We were under financial stress and there were a variety of strategies, and this was an area that we had to look at.
Thank you. Next submission's a comment. We are all human and prone to suffer at the perceptions of others. The administration should be recognized and appreciated for all the hard work and effort they exert to ensure we continue to have such a wonderful and caring place to come to work, come together, work, and share with others. And getting the next question. I think the computer is also getting that Friday feeling. So here we go.
Tired, yeah.
For faculty and staff asked to cede bargain parking to balance the budget, who is parking on campus now?
So I think we sort of talked about that. Appreciate again the question, all the questions that have been put forward, and of course, the ones that we don't get to, we will answer as we always have. No, there was, and I think Philip has really shared this in the conversations. We did not talk about that. It is something we'd have to bargain with both unions. And currently, no one is paying for parking on campus.
Next question. What exactly do you mean by engaged in conversations with unions and students? How did you talk to these groups?
Sure, I can talk about both. And Vice President King and Executive Director Zur were more involved in some of the operational pieces with the unions. I came in frequently, but not as much as they did. So as part of the reductions in force process, we did utilize, we worked within our collective bargaining agreements and held meetings in a time limited way, but in a very robust way, to discuss alternative solutions to reduction. And that went on quite vigorously with really meaningful outcomes, as you saw. Also, we had some good news as well from the state and some other areas that we could actually pull back some of those potential reductions as you saw. And then with students, we did meet with the student leadership several times to talk about and answer any questions they may have about the proposed reductions. Anything I missed? Vice President King or Executive Director Zura?
I think so, Dr. Roberts.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I would just say there's a lot of back and forth, and it's not always going to result in a complete reversal of a decision, but it oftentimes might change the options available for the person impacted. And I want to thank the classified union who I get to work with for the opportunity to work with them that identified different options that I had come up with on my own that worked better for several of our employees.
Yeah, and I would say that there was considerations that individuals had that we were able to accommodate, and we were more than happy to do that, particularly those who are getting ready to retire. So, and also there were other solutions that were back and forth, and we listened to them, and they listened to ours. They had some, we had some, and it all ended into, I think, a way to address the impact. It's still painful, it's difficult, it's hurtful. I mean, those who are impacted, we know that they're colleagues, they're friends, there's people we worked with for a very long period of time. These are not easy times. It's not what any of us get into this work to do, is to reduce something that we've been growing and developing over years and decades. So again, we don't take that lightly, and we took those conversations very, very seriously. And there was a lot of information that had to be shared back and forth. And you're looking at two people in administration that worked tirelessly to provide that information so that we could come up with solutions. And I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you. I see that we have come to the end of our time here together. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know people are often curious how many attendees we had. We were right about 150, 160 throughout the session. The questions that we did not get through will be put together and sent out, answered and sent out as we have done in the past. And there also will be a recording made of this session, and that'll be captioned and provided to campus as well.
Thank you so much, Randy. And I do appreciate the comments about how we want to talk and be with each other going forward. It's very difficult. This does not, when we're making these kinds of reductions, it doesn't bring out the best in all of us. And I know that we want to give all of us grace. At the same time, every employee, every person is so important in the work and in creating the experience for Shoreline. And I hope going forward, we can be mindful of that. And I do appreciate those comments because, you know, as I mentioned in my comments to the board, what we'll remember is how we treated each other and how we can move forward. And also knowing that there will be people over the next few weeks who will not be with us next year, and how do we support them and how we support each other going forward. And I just want to let you know, I do appreciate that, and wish all of us, as we move into our winter break, time to renew, and it's also a time of gratitude for each other and for those who have been with us and all the work that they have provided to us and to our students. And I'm just very grateful for that. And thank you so much for joining us today.